The following episode of the Comics and Crypto podcast is for informational purposes only, and anything expressed by the hosts or their guests is solely their opinion. This podcast does not constitute financial advice, and anyone wishing to invest should seek their own independent financial or professional help. Have fun and enjoy the show.
Hi, I'm Sean O'Hare, and I know comics.
Hi, I'm Spencer Vogel, and I know crypto.
Hi, I'm Kevin Lee Loader, and I don't know shit. This is the Comics and Crypto podcast.
Comics and crypto, crypto and comics, collector's world in a digital age. Comics and crypto, crypto and comics, it's where the next billionaires will be rich. Comics and crypto.
All right, everyone. So today we have an interview that is long overdue. Today we have with us Nick Frontera, who is the founder of Apollo Entertainment and grandson of Jose Delbo, who we talked about many times on the podcast. Super excited to have Nick on today. I have the privilege of working with him on a daily basis at Apollo Entertainment, but very excited to have him on the podcast now for the first time and have him share his extensive knowledge about both comics and NFTs. Just from his background, he knows a lot about both worlds. So yeah, just really excited to have him on. Welcome, Nick.
What's up, Nick?
Hey, Sean. Hey, Spencer. Thanks for the kind words. I'm excited to be here. You know, been big fans of what you guys are doing and just been meaning to get on as long as I could. And I'm glad I can finally join you guys.
Absolutely.
Likewise, man.
Yeah. So just to kick things off, let's hear a little bit about your background in the comic book world.
Definitely. So I've been, you know, like it or not, for me, a comic book fan my whole life. I didn't really have a choice with Jose, you know, being who he was. And luckily I liked it. I loved it. You know, as a kid, I grew up around comics. I remember, you know, I would go over to my grandparents' house and my grandpa would be working on, you know, at that time he was still doing the comic books, probably 30 years ago. He was doing the comic books and he'd be drawing Batman or Superman or Wonder Woman comics. And I would see all the references, which were really cool. He'd have like the Transformers toys and I would want to play with the toys, but he would have to use them, you know, as the references for the comic book. So that was kind of my introduction at a very early age of grandpa draws these things. It wasn't like comics were this thing I picked up in the store. It was my grandpa was creating them, which is a cool, unique perspective. And so as I got older, you know, my grandfather, actually, my whole family ran a camp called Cartoon Camp. And so that was a local camp for kids and adults in the area. And my grandfather would actually give lessons on comic art and how to draw, and we'd create our own comic books. And it was a ton of fun. So I kind of grew up, you know, I definitely didn't inherit my grandfather's, you know, talent with a pencil. But I learned and I helped teach over time. And so I really got an appreciation, you know, for the art form there. And then that kind of, as I got older, you know, I just loved reading comics, collecting comics, I'd go to the comic cons usually with my grandfather and help him with the tables and interacting with the fans and signing autographs and selling his art along with the rest of my family. And so we really got to do some cool stuff. And then, you know, I guess we'll talk a little bit more about what that all led to, but it was kind of based on this foundation of, you know, 25 years of just being around comics through my grandfather's lens. And so it's interesting because when I look at, you know, Wonder Woman, it's my grandpa's Wonder Woman, or Superman, it's my grandpa's Superman. And if I see a different Superman, I'm like, that's cool, but that's not Superman to me, you know. And it's interesting. And now with all the movies and all that's going on there, it's just like, it's so cool to see it in that way with gaming and movies and just everything so much more interactive. So kind of, I have comic in my blood, quite literally.
Yeah. Maybe you could share a little bit about like some like the highlights of Jose's career and, you know, kind of some of the things that he's accomplished.
Absolutely. So Jose, for those of you who aren't familiar with him or just kind of know him as an NFT artist, had really a cool story. And to tell the whole story, I think would kind of take too long. But he started drawing professionally at the age of 16 in Argentina. And so he started with these Spanish comic strips where he was, you know, working with an independent publisher and doing these weekly comics. And very quickly, he was actually in law school at the time. That evolved into a desire to, you know, to do comics full time and to work for the big American publishers. But obviously in Argentina, the opportunities were limited. So he really just dropped everything, got all his papers in order, packed up his bags with his, I guess he had a 2-year-old, and then he had my mom who had just been born. He moved to Brazil for a year where he did a couple comic book projects, and then he moved to the United States, moved to New Jersey. And at the beginning, you know, as an unknown artist, you know, he was a young unknown artist. He was just taking pretty much anything he could get. And so at first, back in those days, the department stores actually used to use comic artists and artists to draw the advertisements for the different products, because the products weren't, they didn't have the photography and whatnot to take the pictures. So they would have the comic artists actually in an art department put together the product advertisements. So he actually started out doing that and became the head of that art department doing all these products. And he did that for a little while until he was, you know, he got an offer to do a couple pages. I believe it was a couple pages from some Billy the Kid comics. And Jose was just an insane fan of American Westerns. So that was just, you know, the super job for him to start. So he was obviously super excited. He was still working at the department store. So he would basically come home from the department store and then work all night on these, you know, comic strips, or pages for the Billy the Kid comics and a couple other Western comics that he did. And he told me the story that like he would be there with my grandmother and she would be kind of keeping him awake, giving him the mate for the, because he was Argentinian, and just really like keeping him going, helping him with cleaning up the pages. And it was this team effort and, you know, taking care of the kids and everything while he was really pursuing his dream. And, you know, one thing led to another, and he just started doing more of these Billy the Kid, more of the Western for Charlton Comics and Gold Key. He got a really interesting opportunity. He got approached by Gold Key to do the Beatles Yellow Submarine comics. So obviously at the time the Beatles were huge and they had the Yellow Submarine story.
Yeah, that's one of my favorites that he's done.
Yeah, one of mine too. It was just such an iconic comic book, and the fact that he did it and his kind of depiction is what then led to all these, you know, spin-offs and the cartoon, and, you know, all those things were based on the way they were depicted in the comic book. And so, you know, a lot of his art kind of definitely will live on through these, you know, Beatles comics. But then, so that was early. As we moved into the 70s and the 80s and the 90s is when he started working for Marvel and DC. And I mean, Jose has done, it's very hard for me to find, you know, major superheroes that Jose hasn't done. There's a couple, you know, big properties that he didn't touch, but everything else he pretty much did. He did Batman, Superman, Wonder Woman, Transformers, Thundercats. Gosh, there's so many. He did some interesting ones like Super Pro, which is like one of my favorites actually, because I was a big football fan growing up. And so, you know, Marvel and the NFL thought it would be a good idea to collaborate on a superhero. And Jose was actually, I think, the only artist. He did the whole series. That series flopped. I don't think because of the art, but it was just apparently there wasn't a ton of crossover between, you know, comic book fans and
no surprise there.
Back in the day. But to me, it's like this cult classic where it's like, that's my favorite superhero. I have so many originals that my grandfather did of Super Pro, because I grew up kind of as that hybrid, you know, huge football fan, comic book nerd. And so, yeah, it was that was cool. That was one of my favorites. He did like Spider-Man, he did The Flash, he did, and then he's like later on, he started working for Disney. So he kind of, that was a whole different thing, because he was doing 101 Dalmatians, Little Mermaid, you know, there's other ones that I'm forgetting, but, you know, kind of this weird spectrum. And then you had all the Western stuff. You had the Twilight Zone, that was earlier days, you know. Spencer, you probably know some too. The list is probably, you know, over 100 different IPs. So
it's insane how much he's done. Yeah.
That's incredible. And Twilight Zone is one of my favorite shows of all time.
Yeah, it was cool. Like, those comics were epic.
Yeah, that's so cool. You know, Spencer and I were so passionate about connecting physical and digital sides of collecting. And Jose Delbo, hearing this history of how he got involved in NFTs, was really inspiring for you, what did you what's your background with NFTs? Like, how did you get started into them?
Yeah, so before I founded Apollo Entertainment, I had been working as a lawyer in the entertainment industry for 5 years. And so it was probably late 2017 that I first heard about NFTs through a project called Decentraland, which I think at the time was this little tiny idea for a decentralized metaverse and became, maybe the biggest metaverse out there right now. I learned about Decentraland. I had just seen Ready Player One, learned about Decentraland, was like, there's something here that makes sense that never made sense for me in crypto before, right? There were all these, like, I had, learned about crypto, and I wish I had moved faster back in 2012 when I first learned about it, and then again in 2015, and all those opportunities. But in 2017, when I could kind of connect the dots on how NFTs would drive the metaverse forward, is when it really clicked, because I was kind of thinking about it from this legal perspective of taking the IP and separating it, and making a tangible digital product through an NFT. And so that idea to me had a ton of value, and so I just got involved. I started talking to the Decentraland team. At the time, as you could probably imagine, some of these projects were far smaller, had really small budgets. So having a lawyer around could, to just give them like, hey, what do you think about this? What do you think about that? Was really good. And, and they appreciated it. And I just wanted to get to know them and be part of it. So I kind of lended my hand wherever I could. I was, speaking to some of the bigger artists at the time, and just trying to become friends with them and learn, what they were passionate about. Because really at the time, I think the biggest sale of an NFT at that time, for art was probably like $5,000 or $4,000, like real small numbers. So there wasn't this huge financial incentive to get involved. But as a collector, I was stoked to just be part of it and start learning about NFTs and get into it. And then, over those next 3 years is when things really started to turn into more of a, not necessarily a business, but something that I saw potential in as the space was starting to grow. And so, over those 3 years, I started to get to know more and more project founders, the founders of Nifty Gateway, the founders of Maker's Place, these early art platforms that were starting to make waves in the industry. And, it was interesting because, and this is kind of how everything starts to connect to Jose. Up for those 3 years, I really wasn't thinking about, the connection between Jose and the potential for the NFT space, because he was a, traditional artist. He was doing his thing at conferences, and it was, pretty separate, right? He wasn't, thinking about NFTs in the same way I was. I was very metaverse, crypto, and he was doing his thing in the comic space. But then the pandemic hit and everything changed, right? The cons started to shut down. Comic artists who were making their living from going to convention couldn't do that anymore. And so, for most comic artists, other than those who like own certain rights, IP rights to the underlying IP, they don't really retire when they retire. Usually retiring means, trying to keep some form of engagement with your fans, make money to keep the money flow coming in, because there's not these massive amounts of money, that came in before or after. Most of these comic artists aren't like musicians or other celebrities. They're getting paid a salary or wage, with some royalties, but usually very low. It's a living wage. It's a good pay while you're working, but then afterwards, there's not a ton of money coming in. And so a lot of them rely on the Comic-Cons to really provide for themselves and their families. And so, when I think combining the fact that Jose was like 86 at the time with the fact that, he wasn't that financially well off, he was worried with the pandemic, what could happen. And so I think it was kind of stars aligning. I think probably 3 to 4 months prior to the pandemic, I had started really getting to know the founder of Maker's Place through mutual contact. And we started, a friend approached me about the potential for Jose doing some comic art in the space. And I kind of tabled it and said, you know what? Yeah, like, let's do this. But it was there was no sense of urgency. The space was still really small. There wasn't really anything there. And I was like, what is my 86-year-old grandfather going to say when I come to him about doing digital art? And so so I did that. I went to I just kind of sat on it for a couple of months, and then when the pandemic hit, and he was kind of like, well, what am I going to do? I said, look, why don't we try this? Why don't we try doing what you were doing? I'll help you with the technical stuff. I'll help you with the digital stuff. And we can create some NFTs. And I'll pause there because I've been talking a lot, but the rest of the story is pretty interesting too after that, because he was obviously hesitant at first, but we kind of talked through a lot of these things, and it was interesting to hear an 86-year-old man's perspective on everything so early on.
Sure. Yeah, I love the whole kind of just, I guess, the whole story of him coming from the physical side, transcending into the digital. I don't know, like Sean said before, it's just very inspirational. And I think, anybody can do it, whether you're an 86-year-old man, if, you have the right people involved, and, the technology can really enable such, I don't know, just incredible things. So I guess going off of that, like, you've been involved in, kind of some of these pivotal moments in comics and NFTs. And so I'd love to really just hear a breakdown of just like the history of comic art and NFTs, starting with, what Jose's done, and even, and really anything beyond that.
Yeah, so I guess that's a good, just a lead into kind of continuing the story, because one of the things that surprised me when we started really thinking about Jose potentially doing NFTs. So Jose released his first NFTs in July of 2020, but we started planning that drop, I think, back in March of 2020, right when the pandemic started. When we were doing that, we really were starting to research comics in the NFT space. And, NFT art had been around for a while, and there was this kind of just complete absence of major comic artists entering the space, and which was interesting to me, because you definitely had some artists doing comic art in the space, but most of them, were independent artists or were pitching themselves as crypto artists. There was some really cool early comic art. Primal Cypher is one that I really liked. Not necessarily a comic artist, but was doing comic art in a really cool way that had crypto art themes early on. And so, we were starting to look, but there really wasn't anyone kind of from the traditional comic book space creating NFTs, and there weren't any comic book NFTs. And so, at the time, Jose had been working on a physical comic book for about 3 years or more before that, and this was kind of his like life's work that he was creating. He was creating this character, and with this real long comic book, and he had been thinking about, okay, like, how do I self-publish this? I don't, it's not necessarily something that would be, attractive to the big IPs, because it's this silent comic book that, is more just, drawings with very little wording that tells its story in a really interesting way. But he was thinking about, okay, I don't know. And so when we started talking about, okay, what would this first drop be? We kind of had these two concepts, and one of the concepts was, let's do something really iconic, right? Let's do something that's timely, that really combines superheroes and themes in a way that I think speaks to a more high-end art form, right? Where Jose as a comic book artist, I think the closest thing to what he does in the NFT space are covers, where when you're doing the cover of a comic book, you have to tell a lot of the story in that one single image. And so for his NFTs, we wanted to change that and evolve that even forward, right? So the idea was, we want to convey really strong messaging through a single piece, right? And so we had these two ideas. We would take this piece that Jose was creating with Superman fighting the COVID virus, right? With this idea of Superman being a metaphor for hope and battling the COVID pandemic, which was represented as these big, like, ugly, bad guy things and fighting in space. And so it was like the first wave of defense, and that would be the feature piece for this collection. And so he worked forever on that piece, and it's a super cool piece. I think it's called The Last Son of Krypton Fights for Mankind or Humankind. And that was a cool one that was on Maker's Place. And then on the other hand, which was, I think, a big leap of faith for him, we said, instead of publishing this comic book which is called Death No Escape, which was this new character he had been creating, really his self-evaluation of death. And as you get older, a very important thing that I think older people think about. And he kind of, put that out there as a comic in comic form. But there was this comic, it was 43 pages, called Death No Escape. And so it was fully done, ready to go by the time we were putting this drop together. And I said to him, what if we do something crazy here? What if we take this comic book in one way or another, right, with whatever rudimentary technologies available at the time, because it wasn't great, right? It was, our options were limited on how to actually get the comic book on the blockchain. But the idea was, let's publish the first original comic book NFT, right? Because we looked around, we're like, there's none out here. Why don't we do this? Why don't we make this special and release this as a comic book NFT? And after Jose got comfortable with the fact that there was kind of the structure that the blockchain provides, that these things would be limited and it wasn't just a digital version that he was putting out there, that people would know that it was coming from him and that it would feel original, like there was something to it, he was ready to go. He said, sure, let's do it, and I said, let's do it limited edition. There was only 250, maybe, and then he kept the options. Oh, maybe we'll do a physical run someday. And I think at the time he was really, but let's try this. Let's try this limited edition, super, special comic book NFT. And, we'll sell it for $75 and see what happens. And, in that weekend, so that was Jose's first drop. Again, this is pretty much all the big drops that we all know in the art space. Jose did something like everything sold out within 30 seconds, which was not typical for comic book artists, and not necessarily typical for Maker's Place, who was had been around for a while, but was just starting to really elevate the artists that they were bringing on. And so everyone was like, wow, this is awesome. I think the drop made something like 12 grand, which for Jose, in terms of today's numbers, or even a year ago's numbers, or 2 years ago's numbers, that wasn't a big drop. But for Jose, that was 3 or 4 months on the road, signing autographs and doing commissions and everything. So the fact that he could do that from his home, bring in, I think, 200 or 300 collectors collected pieces from that first drop, bring in all those new fans, all these new people who were really excited about his art. And, he didn't have a Twitter or anything at the time. So we created that, and we started working together on, all right, we're going to do social media, and you're going to be present, and we're going to do videos. And, he was a really good sport. You imagine at 86, it's not a sure thing. Right. And so, yeah, so that went really well. And then, so I guess getting back to the kind of the history of comics in the space, that was the first, I think, both the first entry of traditional comic artists into the space, and the first original comic book NFT. And that drop was in July of 2020 on Maker's Place. Shortly after that, I'd say it was probably 3 or 4 months after that, was the first major, I'd say, big sale, that in Jose's career. He collaborated with one of the top crypto artists in the space, whose name was Trevor Jones, and who at the time, held all the records for NFT sales, and he had just sold for like 50 grand, which broke the record, a piece that's now called the Bitcoin Bull, but at the time it was called Picasso's Bull. And it was the biggest thing, right? It was this holy, something sells for 50 grand, like NFTs are real, all this stuff. And then a few months later, him and Jose, he approached us about collaborating together, and I was a huge fan of Trevor. So I'm like, we got to do this. Let's do it. And Jose's like, all right, what are we going to do? And it was crazy because Trevor wanted to kind of steer the whole ship, right? He's like, I really want to work with your grandfather, but I have this concept of kind of master to student to master type of thing, where I want your grandfather to create something and then, entrust me with the piece to interpret it in my style. And we're going to create a final piece that, brings all of that together and shows how, it can go from this comic style to Trevor's style, which was, a traditional painter. And then all of that together digitized with the help of, musicians and digital artists and animators. So this kind of like collective people working on a single piece in a time when collaborations were really just getting started in the NFT space was like a really cool thing. And so Jose and Trevor put together that collection. It was the pieces featured Batman. The main piece, the one that sold, I'll never forget that night. But it was this piece called Genesis, and it's really cool. If you haven't seen it, check it out. It's a portrait of Batman, but it goes from Jose's hand-drawn version to a stop motion of Trevor doing the painting, which is an incredible painting. And then it comes to life. The painting becomes animated. It's set to music. That piece sold at the time for, I might be wrong, I think it was 302.5 ETH, which at the time was something like $111,000. And that was the first six-figure sale of an NFT, which happened to be a comic book NFT, which I think was really cool, like a comic book character, interpreted as a fine art painting and then kind of brought to life in a digital way. Would not have been possible for that sort of collaboration. I mean, Jose's in Miami, Trevor's in the UK, and so it's cross-sea collaboration, talking via Zoom and Google Meets was crazy. It was really cool. That I think when that six-figure sale happened, we started to get emails from all these different other comic artists saying, hey, like, I saw this, what can we do to get involved? Can you help us? Can you help us? And for me, that was like, yes, absolutely. Like, don't want your money. Like, let me help you. Let me introduce you to the guys at Maker's Place. Let me introduce you to the guys at Nifty Gateway. Let's do this. And so, we helped Mark McKenna get started. There were several other artists that we were kind of helping here and there on the side whenever, Maker's Place got approached. But Jose,
we've had Mark McKenna on the podcast before.
Yeah, Mark's a great guy, and I was, we helped him out on that first drop, just nothing official, just helping him think, because a lot of this stuff was new, for traditional artists, and I just wanted to see things, grow, right? And I think the Maker's Place team was really great about that. And then it started, more and more traditional comic artists started coming in, and I think Maker's Place will tell you that Jose, that big sale from Jose really helped move the needle for these artists as they approached them and said, look, this isn't some little thing on the side anymore. This is something where you can come in during a pandemic and make real money. And so you started to see, tons of, I know Neil Adams released NFTs, there were several others, I'm just blanking, but top comic artists coming into the space, releasing NFTs, testing the waters. The space really started to get bigger. So then it was, I would say, March 2021. So several months before that, we got the concept. But we wanted to do something really special. So Jose's most famous for doing Transformers and Wonder Woman. Those are the two characters that he's done. That are, he's most well known for. We really wanted to do something special with Wonder Woman, because Wonder Woman was, such an iconic, character generally, and such a strong symbol, I think, for women as a hero and a role model. And so we knew we wanted to do something, but we wanted to find the right artists to do something really special with. So we started talking to Hackatow, who I think is just one of the most incredible artists from what they do in this. It's a couple, it's two of them. What they do together.
I don't think I realized that it was two people. I think I always just
thought
it was one person.
They
cool.
kind of have their specialties and they do things in a really incredible way. But the stories they tell just through their drawings and the sayings that they do in this kind of comic-y style we thought that that would be a perfect match for Jose's kind of, really clean, old, 80s style of, and, that contrast, right? Because Hacktail has so much detail, but then the 80s style of comic art is a little less detailed. It's like you don't have all that 3D coloring and all that. It's just really the line, right? Like the line work. And so we approached Hackataw about doing pieces where essentially Wonder Woman would be the focal point as a metaphor for, heroines throughout history. And so the series was called Heroines. It featured Wonder Woman in the center, and then had all of the different real life heroes or heroines throughout history, female heroes throughout time. We did that as a pretty large collection. It was like there were several. That was right when open editions were becoming a thing, and so we did several editions of those. And it was really cool because Hackataw did such an incredible job, really telling the story. And then right in the middle, contrasted against Hackataw's detail, was this heroine that everyone knew and loved as kind of that metaphor for, for real life female superheroes. And we released that on International Women's Day, and some of the proceeds went to Girls Who Code. So it was really, it was really a nice drop, really a nice thing. But the drop did like $2 million in revenue, which at the time, again, was just really like ground shattering. This was before the people did the massive, numbers. This was kind of one of those early huge drops. And that, I think that was the point where everyone in the comic industry started paying attention. And I think they had really already been starting to do their diligence, but it was at that point that everyone said, all right, like, let's do this. This is where you started to see some of these platforms pop up that were specifically focused on comic art. And I think at that point it was, I guess, April 2021, where the publishers said, hey guys, like, I know you guys have been doing these things at conventions forever, and now some of you guys are doing the same stuff you were doing at conventions or at NFTs, but we actually have a different plan for NFTs than we do for the conventions. So, for now, stop using our IP. And I think, there were a lot of articles that came out at the time that I think made something of it that it may not have been. But really, the studios were, and as you saw it play out, the studios were planning on doing their own stuff, right? And so they wanted their artists to be part of that, but they wanted to do it kind of in the typical way that they control their digital IP. So that kind of leniency that they had provided for artists, for 20 years at Comic-Cons didn't necessarily translate to them in the space. So going forward, they asked their artists to stop using the IP. And so that to me was actually a really significant moment because it did two things, right? It kind of put a pretty big stop on, like former artists doing what they were doing in the physical space in the digital space. A lot of artists continued doing it in the physical space, and that was all, pretty expressly allowed by the studios, but they stopped doing it in the NFT space. For Jose, what that meant was we had been working on our own superhero. And it was, that was going to be, because we always knew, Jose obviously was famous for Wonder Woman, did those things. People know those characters. We didn't know how it would be if we did our own superhero. And Jose always wanted to do one. So we created this Bitcoin superhero called Satoshi the Creator, which was this, half man, half machine superhero based off of Satoshi Nakamoto. And to me, that was always like the perfect superhero backstory, right? The guy does something awesome and then disappears for 20 years. Who knows what he's doing? And so we kind of played off of that story and said, this guy is going to be the hero for our story. And Jose creates Satoshi the Creator. And, we release a drop on Nifty Gateway featuring and releasing for the first time Satoshi the Creator. And that did like over 1 million in sales, which, forget the number. The fact that he was able to release IP that was new IP and it was able to perform, just as well as some of the old stuff, really told me that there was just this huge appetite for comic art in the space, and that people just really liked this style. They wanted to see comic artists in the space, and they were willing to collect it. And for me, that was just massive. Thousands of collectors collected those, Satoshi pieces, and it was super cool. And then you had what I think was the next pivotal moment in the space, which was, VEVE, obviously, as you guys know, entering the space and really starting to make it super easy for these comic publishers to get involved, right? To create some really cool stuff. They did an incredible job on the licensing side. They did an incredible job on the platform side to say, look, we know that your consumers right now aren't getting on Maker's Place, creating a crypto wallet, doing all these things to buy this, comic art. We want to give something that's accessible, that can be accessed through a phone, through all these different things. We want it to look cool. It's going to be an AR, like all this great stuff. And on top of that, we're going to use IP that already exists, right? We're not going to go try to reinvent the wheel and go through the approvals and all that crap that would have had to happen. We're going to take IP that you already have, and we're going to work with you to make some really cool stuff on the blockchain. And so they did that, and that was their basic model, and it worked wonderfully. And what you saw with VEVE is you had all these new consumers who had never bought an NFT before buying these NFTs on the app. Some probably not even knowing really what an NFT was, but they liked the IP, right? They gravitated towards the IP. They wanted to collect the IP. And ultimately, over time, a lot of those people became comic NFT collectors. And we were seeing people coming from VEVE, which is great because you can see it with the little circle in their Twitter name, coming and supporting Jose or supporting the Satoshiverse or whatever it was, starting to migrate towards more traditional, Ethereum NFTs or whatever it might be, but coming in through that outlet, which I thought was so great because there was a beauty in the simplicity of what VEVE offered, in the early days, and kind of now they're really expanding and making more complexity, but that simplicity I think was needed for that time. And so it was really cool. It was really cool to see that happen. I think that was a really major moment in comic history. And I think that the future is real bright. We're working on things that are super cool. And then I see all these other projects doing some awesome stuff. I know VEVE's working on something really cool. And you're more and more you're just seeing the publishers, because that was like, to me, that was the base level, right? We have this IP, let's get it out, let's make NFTs using stuff we got. It's that next level that really excites me. It's, what are we doing next? What is DC doing? And you already saw that, I think, with Bat Cowls, right? Where that was a really meaningful collection because I think it was the first time DC or even any major publisher made NFTs, but then also created the really engaging experience on their end, right? That it wasn't just an IP play. It was this full circle. The IP connects to an engaging experience within that universe.
I've been having so much fun just like being able to vote using my Bat Cows and all like basically the upcoming storyline. Like I think just today cool. There was one today, a vote for the next villain, which I think it was like the Riddler and Crocodile. I forget the other ones, but very cool to be able to vote on whatever. And then you see the votes come in. It's like, oh, the one that I voted for is the one that like Nightwing. They just announced is going to be Batman's sidekick, which is the one that I voted for, which I was super psyched about because that was the first drop that I ever got on VEVE.
Awesome. Yeah. I mean, to me, that's the future. That's what NFTs can provide for on the business side. That it's much harder to do without NFTs. There's just that sort of, across different platforms, being able to know who loves your IP and giving them meaningful ways to participate and knowing that it's them, right? It's not about your email account or whatever it is. It's if you love my stuff, go get this, and then you can participate in this story creation. So that was super cool. I think the metaverse is going to be incredibly huge. We're working with LA Comic-Con and Comic-Con Metaverse, who's putting together a really, really cool digital metaverse. And then you see what VEVE's doing at San Diego Comic-Con coming up, which I think is awesome to see, more and more NFT projects and platforms entering the traditional space. So yeah, I think that brings us to date on the history. I might be missing stuff, but I think the future's really bright.
Yeah. And before we keep going, I just want to go back and say for all you collectors out there who are really serious about, collecting something from the history of comic art and NFTs, that first Jose Delbo comic, the Death comic, there's only 250 of them, super, super significant. I think they're currently going for around like 1 ETH. Is that the current floor?
Yeah, it's
so
around
so it's still, relatively accessible for now, but, I can see that being a hugely, hugely significant piece of history going forward.
Forgetting I mean, obviously it has its place in NFT history, but for Jose, that was really the only comic book he ever created for himself from scratch. Like it was a big life career moment for him. So it's cool. I'm really
first on the blockchain. That's incredible, man. That's You're diving a little bit into the metaverse. I'd love to hear more about your plans for the future of the Satoshiverse.
Yeah. So Satoshiverse kind of evolved out of the that character that we created, Satoshi the Creator, back when in the early days. And we saw this huge appetite for this superhero, and so since then we've been working. We have a studio. It's a 30-person 3D production studio through Apollo Entertainment. And we've been working with Jose and doing, he was doing a lot of the early concepting. And then we kind of took this idea and wrote this entire lore about the backstory for Satoshi and how everything comes to be, and using the blockchain to fight corruption, and this whole story of, kind of loosely based on the pandemic and, surveillance state and just getting past that. We had so we built out this whole story, and we had our Legionnaire collection released in November of last year. 5,555 Legionnaires released, and it was this really, I mean, I'm biased, but I thought it was really cool, and for the time very unique. These fully 3D art pieces with custom backgrounds and custom music, and so that was our big first accomplishment. But our goal here was definitely not to do a PFP collection. My vision, and I think to Jose kind of lending from the comic side and the story side, but my vision is to kind of create that next Avengers or Justice League for the blockchain. This superhero universe that plays into the themes of blockchain and corruption and decentralization of finance. And teaches a lot of the lessons that we're trying to teach through cryptocurrency through a visual and immersive experience, both through what we're building right now, which is a play and earn game, which is going to be coming out in alpha towards the end of this year, and then through other comic integrations, right? That to really build out an IP that spans all the different, we're doing digital collectibles and digital action figures. We'll eventually do a comic book. So there's a lot of extensions of this superhero, but we're starting kind of in the metaverse, both from partnering with other metaverses and then creating our own metaverse type play and earn game using the Legionnaires, where you'll be able to earn items and different power-ups, and really have this decentralized player economy, while at the same time getting certain passive things by owning Legionnaires, and then now and I guess that's kind of the Satoshiverse up until a point where we got, which I think actually is very significant, maybe going back into the history of comics in the space. We had, so kind of separate from this at the time, I bought a Bored Ape Yacht Club 8 right when they minted. And I just bought one, and right from the beginning, we called him Captain 8 Mo, and said, this is our 8, right? And I think I paid half an ETH for it, and it was like this really cool. I picked the one I liked. It was this kind of mean looking ape with a cigarette and a sailor hat and nothing else. So he just went and picked the one we liked, and that from a significance in the comic industry, that collection, I think, really kicked off, and we can debate if it's comics or cartoons or whatever it is, but these hand-drawn generative art that just really took over the space for the last year, right? And there was this wave of people putting cartoon profile pictures, and celebrities using cartoons as their profile pictures. And so all of a sudden people were really embracing this comic-y cartoony style for, in the space, but also for social media, for everything. And what I thought was really significant about that was this idea of, IP rights, right? That you could take that that creation, which is a pretty simple creation, right? I think it actually becomes a little more difficult the more complex the creation is. But with these simple, ape figures, you could take that and you could use the popularity of the Bored Ape Yacht Club brand to, do your own stuff. And so we saw this huge opportunity there to obviously marry maybe the biggest IP in the space with the, one of the bigger comic artists in the space, in Jose. And we built out this whole collection and whole story around this Captain Apemo character. And so now, I think there were like over 12 or 1300 collectors who collected those pieces, which were art pieces. And we started to see an appetite for that. So we basically, in the last 4 months, have been combining the two worlds. So we have this new collection that's coming out called the Apemo Army, which is essentially Captain Apemo and his group of, I guess his posse of animal-like humanoids who there's some lore that we haven't revealed yet, but who get together with Apemo and then help eventually meet Satoshi and help Satoshi to battle the bad guys who've taken over the world. And so we've got this new collection coming out, which is a reward collection for some of Jose's holders and then Legionnaire holders. And then there's going to be a sale component as well called Apemo Army. They're going to be these super cool, like high fidelity 3D avatars that then you'll be able to use and also passively and actively earn within our play and earn game that we're building. And so
they look incredible. Yeah, they're such just like the high fidelity. I mean, they're gaming ready. And so what are the 5 different characters, the different animals?
So there's a bull, there is a bear, there's a lynx, so like a feline, a cat. There is an ape, an older ape is the hero, and then there's a wolf. It's kind of depending on what skin it gets. It looks like a wolf sometimes, it looks like a dog sometimes, but it's kind of that wolf, that mean wolf.
Yeah. And will those be evenly distributed throughout the collection?
Yeah, so they'll be evenly distributed. The different so our idea with this collection is to make every character unique. So essentially my goal was, if this was naked and had an expressionless, it should be different than any other character out there. Because I want those characters to feel like this is your character, right? Like, and whether it's smiling or angry or whatever in 3D, it should be able to do all those things, right? As the story progresses. And so for me, it was, let's make these things like totally unique. And then they're going to have clothing, they're going to have, props, headgear, eyeglasses, all the stuff that you would normally see, but they're super high fidelity. And the cool part is we're making them all in Unreal. So you're going to be able to use them in the game and then hopefully potentially outside of the game, in other games, building in Unreal and elsewhere later on.
Yeah, so definitely look out for that drop upcoming. And if you actually want to get some free avatars from this upcoming collection, you can buy some of our past stuff. So I think it's, if you buy 2 Legionnaires, that gets you 1 Apemo Army, and then some of the other pieces also are kind of just one of one swaps, right?
Yeah, exactly. The Jose's Apemo collection on Nifty Gateway gives you 1 or more free mints, and then Legionnaires, it's 2. For every 2 you have, you get a free mint. But the cool thing with the Legionnaires are they're also going to be kind of utility giving as we go forward. So I definitely, if you like the project, pick up 2 Legionnaires and get a free, because that's where it's going to be, where the value, a lot of the value is going to be.
For sure. And then the last thing that I wanted to talk about, we have a very cool drop coming up on August 13th with none other than the great Val Kilmer. So I'd love to have you talk a little bit more about that one.
Yeah, so Jose partnered with Val. They're doing some pretty cool stuff. So Jose, as I mentioned, started drawing Billy the Kid. That was his first. That was, his dream. It's maybe to him the most significant character that he's drawn, because it was the big one, the first one. Val played Billy the Kid in a movie, I think 25, 30 years ago, kind of during the peak of his career. And now both Val and Jose are kind of at the twilight of their careers, right? I mean, Jose is much older, and obviously Val, unfortunately, has been struggling with some health issues. And so I think they're both kind of in that phase of their life where they're doing what they love and just only what they love, right? And both of them, Val himself is an artist. He writes poetry. He has a book of poems called The Cowboy. He does visual art, ever since he stopped acting. And he didn't even stop. He was in the Maverick movie recently. Yeah. But yeah, he's a talented artist himself, and has been trying to give spotlights to other artists as well. So they are getting together for a Billy the Kid drop that will feature Jose's Billy the Kid, and one of the pieces will be a depiction of Val as Billy the Kid, with Val's poetry that he's creating for this drop on the same pieces. So I'm super excited about that. I'm a huge fan of Val Kilmer, and it's crazy to be thinking to get these opportunities to work with these awesome talents who are iconic in our own in my history.
That's so amazing. And Doc Holliday, him playing Doc Holliday in Tombstone, is one of my favorite performances ever. I mean, he's nominated for an Oscar for that role. Should have won, in my opinion, but
yeah,
he was incredible. Yeah, he was amazing. Yeah,
that was a good movie, great movie. We thought about an "I'll Be Your Huckleberry" piece, but we decided Billy the Kid was so significant to Jose that. And maybe that'll be the follow-up, a Tombstone collaboration.
Nice.
Nice. Yeah, so look out for that on August 13th, dropping on Nifty Gateway.
Thank you both so much for having me on. It was a pleasure. Happy to join whenever I can. Happy to talk comics. Always love to talk comics. So thank you guys for what you're doing. I think it's so important to have these sort of sessions and bring people in. So awesome stuff.
Comics and crypto and comics, collectors world in a digital age. Comics and crypto and comics is where the next billion